Trump, his retweets of anti-Muslim propaganda from a British hate group, and the continued fallout. And yes, there is continued fallout. You might recall Mr. Trump calls his Twitter habit, quote, modern-day presidential. Perhaps it is if modern-day presidential means misinformed, factually inaccurate, and perhaps at times even dangerous. Dangerous because today State Department officials told us they're worried about new and violent demonstrations perhaps erupting at American embassies in the Middle East. In Britain's House of Commons, lawmakers lined up to join Prime Minister Theresa May in admonishing the president.
And wouldn't the world be a better place if the Prime Minister could persuade the President of the United States to delete his Twitter account?
Well, this afternoon, Press Secretary Sarah Sanders was peppered with questions about the reason behind it all, the president's retweeting of those 3 videos from a British hate group. In a moment, we'll get further into who this group is and what it stands for, because you ought to see what the leader of the free world is endorsing by spewing it out to his nearly 44 million Twitter followers. But first, I just want to play for you what Sanders said today in defense of it, because you might not actually believe it unless you hear it for yourself.
Look, I think what he's done is elevate the conversation to talk about a real issue and a real threat, and that's extreme violence and extreme terrorism, something that we know to be very real and something the president feels strongly about talking about and bringing up and making sure is an issue every single day, that we're looking at the best ways to protect Americans.
Elevate the conversation, she said right there. Elevating the conversation by giving the presidential seal of approval to videos from a hate group, videos originally tweeted out by this woman, Jada Franson. She is second in command at the group called Britain First. Britain First is anti-immigrant, but first and foremost, it is anti-Muslim. Here's a sample of how Jada Franson elevates the conversation as she confronts a Muslim woman in front of her young children.
You're being hidden because your men can't control their areas.
This confrontation last year earned Jada Franson a conviction for religiously aggravated harassment. And it's not some kind of one-off. It is actually what this group, Britain First, does. It's what it is. They march into Muslim neighborhoods wearing paramilitary-style uniforms, confronting, harassing residents, and it's what the president is now retweeting. In armored SUVs, they sometimes go to places in Britain they call Muslim occupied. Here's the leader of the organization whose videos the president is retweeting.
Right, we're in East London, the heart of Muslim East London. We've got an armoured Land Rover full of activists. We're just heading down now into the Brick Lane, Whitechapel area. We've received new information that Muslim gangs are trying to enforce certain parts of Sharia law. And quite frankly, we're not having this. We've got activist teams out across the country tonight carrying out similar Christian patrols in heavily Muslim areas.
And it goes on and on beyond that. Now, last year, British MP Joe Cox was murdered by a man, according to one of the witnesses, shouting Britain First as he shot and stabbed her to death. I spoke to Joe Cox's widower last night.
This is like the president retweeting the Ku Klux Klan. You know, this is not a mainstream organization. For the president of the United States, our greatest ally as a country, to be retweeting, to be providing a microphone to those voices, I think everybody, no matter what your political persuasion in the UK, I think has been shocked by that.
Well, these voices are a minority in Britain, we should point out, and a minority here. And those voices have now been exponentially amplified by the President of the United States, who the White House now says maybe didn't even know who he was retweeting.
Did the president, when he retweeted Jada Franson, know who she was?
No, I don't believe so. But again, I think he knew what the issues are, and that is that we have a real threat of extreme violence and terrorism, not just in this country, but across the globe, particularly in Europe. And that was the point he was making, and I don't really have much to add beyond that.
So Sarah Sanders just said President Trump, the most powerful person in the world who has access to reams of information and the internet, probably doesn't know anything about the person whose propaganda he is actually spreading, elevating the conversation.